Welcome to this session 3 of Unit 513-400, where we're mainly though going to focus on Unit 400, which is about management of yourself. In that last session, you should have at the end reflected on your behavioural styles and done one of the work style questionnaires, at least one of them, so you get an idea of what your work style is, because they're really useful in you being aware of how you impact on others and what your sort of impact is in the workplace and how you can make that the most effective. But in this one, we're going to start looking at planning your workload and at planning personal development. And planning workload is really important and inextricably linked to something else we'll talk about, which is time management and prioritization. So we'll be looking at some methods you can use for planning your workload effectively, because we're all different and we all have a different way of working, and we'll look at some recognized time management and prioritization techniques. And again, same thing, some will work for some will work for others, and some people will already be using some things. Nothing's the right answer. It's just about finding something that works for you as part of your self-awareness and developing yourself. We'll bring all that together and we'll look at how we plan our personal development. And as we should have identified some areas as we've looked at our self-awareness of areas where we need to improve, things we need to do differently. And because we've been examining ourselves and then looking at our learning styles, information and development methods, we can plan an effective way to develop ourselves and to keep going and using it throughout the qualification and a career, hopefully. But for this qualification, you need to keep a self-development plan, personal development plan going through the qualification. So let's have a look at what we're hoping to cover in this session. So aims for this session are to understand different approaches to planning own workload. And as we said, that'll be different for everybody. And then second is to understand time management techniques and tools, and that'll include prioritization. And then we'll just talk about knowing how to plan your own personal development. Many of these things will be familiar to you already, but hopefully by the end of this session, you should be able to evaluate different approaches to workload planning, including how they can be used to help manage multiple tasks, which most of us probably responsible for. Assess time management techniques and tools that can be used in the workplace. Evaluate methods of prioritizing activities, explain the purpose and components of a personal development plan, and evaluate a range of methods for personal development. So let's get started. So we've said workload planning is essential, and I want to look at what the effect or the impact is of effective work planning. Now, the first area is on your professional life and on your career. If you're using your time better, if you're planning things, you increase your capacity and your productivity, which means that your role in your organization becomes more effective, which has got to be good for your prospects. People see that you're planning things and that you're getting things done. It can also have an impact on your team and your colleagues. There are interrelated tasks that colleagues may not be able to start doing something or may get frustrated because you haven't finished something or something hasn't been done on time. So there's that sort of side of it. And if you're in a team, your colleagues are going to start to feel that you're not keeping up with things. So planning things, having effective planning can mean that anyone who relies on you to complete tasks on time, or if you're planned, at least you can give them sufficient warning that things are going to be late. And finally, personal and home life. It has a knock-on effect, those things. Lowering stress, improving your work-life balance, which in a roundabout way then impacts on the others, because if you are less stressed and you're having a better home life balance, you'll be turning up for work on time, you'll be turning up fresh, and therefore your career will be better and you'll be better working with your colleagues. So it's an all-round thing, really, not just about planning things while you're in the office. It's an overall benefit and makes you a more rounded employee if you can have a effective planning of your workload. And finally, just go back, that knock on to team and colleagues can be, because if you're seen as a manager to have your workload planned and effectively structured, it has a knock-on effect to others who you are a role model to or you are leading. So let's have a look at the oversight of workload planning. So when we're talking about planning our workload, I think we can say that things fall into two categories. They're either formal or informal planning. By formal, we're normally talking about tools such as IT-based things such as Microsoft Project and off-the-shelf packages such as TimeWax, and there are a number of out there, and you'll see adverts for them. And these are all about programming timescales, sequencing tasks. The bigger ones usually for within a project, for that larger project, where there's multiple tasks, multiple stakeholders, and they're often used collaboratively with other people taking access to them. There's also general ones such as Outlook diaries, Gantt charts, etc., and they can be used. And then there's the more informal, and I'm talking there about things that we do for ourselves, things that we're going to talk about in a minute, such as to-do lists, use of a diary, mind mapping, brainstorming and putting action plans together. And generally these are things that we do for ourselves. They're not publicly for reporting to people, whereas the others, the formal ones, tend to be like public reporting things. These are just more informal planning tasks that we use to allocate things and prioritize things, and often done for things that are taken from the more formal things. So there might be a larger project where we are allocated a responsibility, and then we might do some informal planning to make sure that we keep up and keep to it. The formal ones will usually include some sort of form of training or etiquette to keep them standardized, because lots of people are collaborating on them. But the simple informal ones are just about finding things that work for us, and that's the area I'd really like to take a look at, is the informal processes that we can use. So let's have a look at some of those. So let's examine the informal a little bit more, those planning methods, the processes we can use, because everybody should have busy and quiet periods in their everyday working days and weeks if they've planned their workload effectively. There'll be times when you're extremely busy with multiple deadlines, lots and lots going on, things you've got to get done, and there'll be other times when you're not as busy. Those quiet periods, and by that I do not mean that you have periods when you've got no active projects or tasks ongoing. But it usually means that in those periods the deadlines are a bit further away, there's nothing impending or really urgent, and we can plan our workload in those time periods. In those quiet time periods, that's when we need to do that planning, because that is an important task, and we'll look at importance versus urgency in a little bit more detail later. But we need to identify what we need to complete, make realistic estimates on how much time it's going to take us, take a longer term view, look at the overall deadlines, not just those that are the most urgent. And to that we can follow some sort of structure. So we're going to have a look at a quick structure that we could use to follow. First stage of our planning process could be about making a master list. So this is where we're listing all our outstanding tasks. And this could be, as I quite often use, this could be mind mapping, because what we want to do is consider everything and make sure we've identified any links between the tasks. And then we consider the sort of things we can use for that. All the sources of information that are out there, and it'll be different in every organisation, but things such as forecasts for sales and production, operational plans, project plans. Don't forget your own personal objectives, things from your development plan, areas where you want to improve your prospects or your career. And then we need to start rating them in terms of urgency and importance, and we've talked about that already a couple of times now, but we'll talk about that in more detail later, some specific methods for recognising in that if you're struggling with it. And even if you're not and you think you know it, it's good to reflect on it, because we all have a tendency to lose perspective about those important and urgent things. And then finally, it's about listing them all in priority with overall deadlines. And from that, we can move on to stage 2 and make a plan for each of those individual tasks or projects. And you do this, and the difference being that you only consider that individual task and its priorities. You break it down into the stages and the order things need to be done, and consider who needs to be involved in that. And then if it's a major project, this may be that you've used the outline plan and the milestones that were in it that were considered. So for example, if it's an individual task but it's one of the major tasks, then you'll be using the project plan that's probably not yours but may have come from the project manager, etc. And from these, because they're more long-term overall, we can then start to consider our more time-sensitive planning, our weekly and daily, and that might involve things such as number 3 there, planning a weekly list. Think about the things that you can do this week, things taken from 1 and 2, prioritise them and plan them over the next few days. Try to anticipate busy periods or quiet periods in your daily routine. That might be quiet periods, might be the end of the day when you know you're going to be tired, and adjust your plans accordingly. You may reference this to your diary, which we'll come to later. And then be prepared to reschedule as you go along, because people start thinking, oh, I must do this list in order. Well, it's not. It's a list that can be an ongoing process where we can reschedule them and keep people informed of what's happened. And from that, we might then be able to prepare, using stuff from that weekly list, plan a daily to-do list. I believe that doing it at the end of the day, of the previous day, is the best time to do it, because at that point you can use some reflection, a bit like clearing your mind, it's a bit like clearing your desk, go over what's been covered in the previous day, look back at your weekly list, see what still needs to be done, take stock, and then be ready to go first thing in the morning. We can just list tasks here, task 1, 2, 3, estimate how long they will take, decide on how many things we can achieve today and what we might achieve tomorrow, referring to our diary. You can decide roughly when we will do them, but be realistic and do not completely fill your day, because you need to leave some contingency. We all know that things come up, and that if we've packed that daily list with so many things that every minute's full, then when one, we're not going to have a chance for a break, and two, we're not going to be able to take on board those things are bound to happen, which is the things that come up in the day, the things that we're not expecting. So we need some contingency in there. And if nothing does come up, then we'll be ahead of schedule, and that's great. And I always say that anything left at the bottom of that list at the end of the day should go to the top of the next day's list. But if it keeps getting left there, it shows that it isn't urgent, and it may be not important. We'll look at urgency and importance in a little bit later. We may just be avoiding it. And the final thing is use a diary. It's about keeping time frames to your work. A week to view diary can be good, or an electronic planner. If you're using an electronic planner, letting other people see your schedule, one, encourages you to keep it up to date and tidy, but two, lets other people know that you're busy in certain periods of the day and the time, so therefore it might help them to stop dumping things on you or contacting you when they think you're busy, so you can use it. Shared access can be really useful and stopping you getting double booked. And if you do start a diary, you need to keep it and use it and keep it up to date. They're all great things, but the final one, number 6, you need to make these things a habit. Identifying time for you to do those to-do lists and for that planning, disciplining yourself to that planning, setting aside 15 minutes at a minimum each day. You can be amazed how much it'll help and how much you can get done, but you need to keep doing it. It needs to be a routine. You need to be identifying things that are stealing your time, perhaps emails, and set times for doing those within a certain part of the day so you don't get distracted. So we'll have a look at some methods that we can use to do these, but these are just general time management, workplace planning techniques that we need to think about utilising. As I said, everyone's different. So quick overview there, and most of that probably seems common sense, or you knew about it, or you're doing it, but the problem is sometimes it's about reflection and just thinking about it, about the routine and habit, because it can fast become a situation where we're not doing it or we're not following it, because managing workloads can often involve multiple tasks, and that means setting priorities. When you have a range of competing tasks and a limited amount of time, as we all have, you may find that you're trying to complete more than one task at a time. And much as we've talked about in the past in time management about multitasking, it should be avoided at all times as a time management technique. But it is unavoidable sometimes, but we should be aiming with good planning to be switching between tasks when it's needed, because if we try and multitask, there is a good chance that we'll produce lower quality than we would otherwise achieve for that task, or we'll become paralysed in indecision about what to do first. We'll talk about setting priorities and some techniques behind it, because setting priorities can establish an order that we should do things so that we can channel our energies. This was about making sure we give that task the energy and the focus that is needed at every stage, and prioritising that is one way we can do it. So enough going on there about how we plan in workload, what we're supposed to be doing. It's a general overview that we've had. And the next part of the session, we're going to concentrate on some specific tools and techniques that we might be able to use, some recognised ones. But that doesn't mean you've got to have them. You might have your own way of dealing with these things, or you may research some of your own, but you should have some sort of personal time management tools, techniques that you decide are suitable for your situation, your role, your organisation. The ones we're going to look at are Eisenhower's grid, Lakin's ABC, the 4 Ds, and then effective delegation, which we should all be aware of and is the ultimate time saver. So to start us off, we're going to do an activity. There's a link on the website. I want you to read the introduction to Eisenhower's matrix, which contains a video explaining what it's all about, and then complete the prioritization activity worksheet and upload that. And then I'll see you back for the next bit. Good luck.